was a typical night in the sprawling metropolis. High above the bustling streets, the city lights flickered like distant stars. Amidst this urban jungle, a solitary figure sat in a dimly lit apartment on the 20th floor of a towering high-rise. The man had lived here for several years, finding solace in the isolation that the height provided. It was a place where he could escape the noise and chaos below, a refuge from a world that seemed increasingly alien to him. The apartment itself was unremarkable, a standard one-bedroom unit with minimal furnishings. A worn-out couch, a small coffee table, and a bookshelf filled with dusty volumes were the only signs of life. The man spent most of his evenings here, reading or staring out the window at the cityscape. It was a view he never grew tired of, even though he often felt a pang of loneliness as he gazed out at the countless windows that mirrored his own. On this particular night, a sense of unease hung in the air. The man couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something felt off. He tried to shake the feeling by immersing himself in a book, but the words seemed to blur together, refusing to capture his attention. Frustrated, he closed the book and stood up, walking over to the window. He pressed his forehead against the cool glass, letting the city lights blur into a kaleidoscope of colors. As he stared out, something caught his eye. In the window of the building opposite, he saw a figure standing still. It was unusual, given the late hour. Most people were either asleep or occupied with their own lives behind drawn curtains. But this figure was different. It stood motionless, facing his direction, almost as if it was watching him. He tried to dismiss it as a trick of the light or his imagination playing tricks on him, but the longer he looked, the more real it became. The figure was indistinct, shrouded in darkness, but there was an unmistakable presence about it. A chill ran down his spine, and he instinctively stepped back from the window. Over the next few days, the man couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every evening he would look out the window and see the figure standing in the same spot, always looking in his direction. He tried to tell himself it was just a coincidence, that perhaps it was someone with a similar habit of staring out the window. But the unease gnawed at him, growing stronger with each passing day. One night, he decided to confront his fear. He grabbed a pair of binoculars from a drawer and focused them on the window across the way. The figure was clearer now, but still indistinct. It seemed to be a person, but there was something unnatural about the way it stood, as if it were suspended in time. The man felt a surge of irrational anger and waved his arms, hoping to get the figure's attention. But it remained motionless, unfazed by his gestures. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, the man decided to visit the building across the street. It was an older structure, much like his own, and he found himself wondering if it had a similar history of inhabitants seeking refuge from the world. He entered the lobby and approached the concierge, a weary-looking man who seemed accustomed to odd requests. "Excuse me, do you know who lives in the apartment directly across from mine?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The concierge looked up from his newspaper, eyeing him curiously. "Which apartment are you referring to?" "The one on the 20th floor, facing this building," the man replied. The concierge's expression shifted, a flicker of something unrecognizable passing over his face. "There hasn't been anyone living in that apartment for years. It's been vacant since the last tenant passed away." A cold knot of fear formed in the man's stomach. "Are you sure? I've seen someone standing in the window every night." The concierge shook his head. "I'm sure. No one has been in there. You must be mistaken." The man left the building, his mind racing with questions. How could it be possible? Had he been imagining the figure all along? But the presence felt too real to be a mere figment of his imagination. He returned to his apartment, feeling more isolated than ever. That night, as he stared out the window, the figure was there again. This time it seemed closer, as if it had moved forward. The man felt a surge of panic, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. He stumbled back, unable to tear his eyes away from the apparition. It was then that he noticed something new, a faint outline of a face, pale and haunting, staring back at him with hollow eyes. Desperation clawed at him. He had to know the truth, even if it meant confronting the ghostly presence head-on. He grabbed his flashlight and headed back to the building across the street. The concierge was gone for the night, and the lobby was eerily quiet. He made his way to the 20th floor, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. When he reached the door of the vacant apartment, he hesitated. A sense of foreboding washed over him, but he pushed it aside and turned the handle. To his surprise, the door creaked open, revealing a dark, musty interior. He stepped inside, the beam of his flashlight cutting through the darkness. The apartment was in a state of disrepair, with peeling wallpaper and dusty furniture covered in white sheets. It was as if time had stood still since the last occupant had left. The man walked slowly through the rooms, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached the window and shone his flashlight outside, half expecting to see his own apartment staring back at him. But the window was empty. There was no figure standing there, no sign of the presence that had haunted him. He let out a sigh of relief, feeling foolish for having let his imagination run wild. He turned to leave, but something caught his eye. In the corner of the room, partially hidden by shadows, was a mirror. Its surface was covered in a thick layer of dust, but he could make out his own reflection. As he stared into the mirror, a sense of dread settled over him. His reflection seemed different, distorted in some way. He stepped closer, wiping the dust away with his sleeve. The face staring back at him was his own, but there was something wrong with the eyes. They were hollow, empty, like the eyes of the figure he had seen in the window. A chill ran through him, and he stumbled back, his flashlight slipping from his grasp. It clattered to the floor, plunging the room into darkness. Panic set in as he fumbled for the flashlight, his hands trembling. When he finally managed to turn it back on, the beam illuminated the mirror once more. The figure was there, standing behind him, its eyes locked onto his. He spun around, but the room was empty. The only sound was his own ragged breathing. He backed away from the mirror, desperate to escape the apartment. As he reached the door, he heard a whisper, faint and ghostly, coming from the direction of the mirror. "Leave," it said, the voice echoing in his mind. "Leave before it's too late." The man didn't need to be told twice. He fled the apartment, racing down the stairs and out into the night. He didn't stop running until he was back in the safety of his own apartment. He locked the door behind him and sank to the floor, his heart pounding in his chest. For the next few days, he avoided looking out the window, fearing what he might see. But the feeling of being watched never left him. He began to notice other strange occurrences, objects moving on their own, unexplained noises in the middle of the night. His once peaceful refuge had become a prison, haunted by a presence he couldn't escape. He tried to reach out to friends and family, but they dismissed his fears as paranoia. They told him he needed to get out more, to socialize and find a hobby. But the man knew the truth. He was being watched, and there was no escaping it. One night, unable to bear the isolation any longer, he decided to confront the presence one last time. He stood by the window, staring out at the city below. The figure was there, as always, but this time it seemed closer, almost within reach. He felt a pull, an irresistible urge to go to it. He opened the window and climbed onto the ledge, the cool night air whipping around him. The city stretched out below, a sea of lights and noise. He looked across at the figure, its hollow eyes drawing him in. He took a step forward, feeling weightless, free from the fear and loneliness that had plagued him. As he fell, he felt a strange sense of peace. The figure watched him, its expression unreadable, as he plummeted towards the ground. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was the reflection of his own empty eyes staring back at him. The next morning, the city went about its business as usual. The man's apartment was quiet, the window left open to the breeze. The figure in the opposite building was gone, leaving only an empty window staring out at the world. The presence that had haunted him had vanished, leaving no trace of its existence. The man's fall was ruled an accident, a tragic end to a lonely life. But those who lived in the building knew better. They spoke in hushed tones about the figure in the window, about the whispers in the night. The story spread, becoming a legend of the haunted high-rise, a warning to those who dared to look too closely at the darkness within. And so, the ghostly figure continued to watch, waiting for its next victim. The city moved on, oblivious to the presence lurking in the shadows, always watching, always waiting.